In this video, we're going to make a very nice text writing effect. Each letter gets written one by one with variable speed, and the text position is preserved as it gets written. Let's begin! Hello and welcome, I'm your Code Monkey, and this channel is all about helping you learn how to make your own games with in-depth tutorials made by a professional indie game developer. So if you find the video helpful, consider subscribing. So this is the effect that we want to make. The text is written letter by letter with a custom speed. As you can see, the text position is preserved, so each letter gets written exactly where it should be. There is also the ability to skip writing the text by clicking whilst the text writer is active, so click starts and click and it skips. And you can also hear a nice talking sound effect that is active while the text is being written, and as soon as the text finishes, the sound stops. You might recognize this setup since this is pretty much exactly the assistant from Battle Royale Tycoon. This is an excellent effect to polish up any text you have in your game. Alright, so this is our goal. Let's get to it. Here we are in our starting scene. So let's begin by making the UI visual. So over here in the canvas, let's make a new game object and call this the UI assistant. Now inside, let's place a new UI image. And over here in my textures folder, I have the assistant image straight from Battle Royale Tycoon. Now in here, let's make a new game object. This will be our container for our message. Then inside, let's add an image for the arrow, another image for the background. Alright, this is the visual. Now for the UI text. In here, let's write some random text. Let's set it up right in there and expand the size to occupy the entire box. Now here, to make this support any amount of text, let's add the best fit and put a nice maximum. Okay. Alright, so this is our UI setup. We have a nice assistant visual and the text object set up to support any amount of text that we want. Okay, so with this setup, let's go into our code. So let's first go into the scripts, make a new C# script. This will be our UI assistant. Drag it onto our game object, okay. Now in here, let's begin by first storing a reference to our text object. So let's grab it on our private void await. We need to be using Unity engine.ui, okay. Okay, we have our reference for our text field. Now just for testing, let's try setting the text on our start. So in here we simply do message text.text, and let's put this some text. Okay, let's try it out and see if our text changes. And yep, there it is, there's our nice text. Okay, so far so good. We have our UI set up and the code is running. Now let's make our text writer. So over here, make a new C# script. This will be the text writer. Let's make a game object to run our script. So in here, make our text writer and drag our script, okay. Okay, so let's begin by making a function to add a writer to write some text. So let's call this simply add writer. Now in here, we need to think about what parameters we're going to need. Now, first of all, we obviously need to know where we want to write, so we need a reference to the target text object. Then we also need to know what text we want to write, so a string for our text to write. And finally, we need to know how fast each character should be written. So let's receive a float for the time per character. Alright, that's it. This is all the information we need. Now let's store these as variables. Okay, now we also need to store a timer, so a simple float for our current timer. And now let's do our update. And on our update, first of all, we're only going to run this if we have a UI text object. So we do a simple if. So if it is not null, then our text writer is active. Then in here, we simply reduce our timer by the time.delta time. Then we check if the timer is under 0. Then we want to display next character. So the first thing we do is reset the timer. So we increase the timer by our time per character. That way the code in here only gets run every this amount of time. And now in here, we need to know what is the next character. So that means that we need to keep track of the current index that we are writing. So up here, we store an int for our character index. When we add the writer, we set this simply to 0. And then on the update, we increase the index. So every time we go through this, we increase it by 1. And as we increase it, we set the text. So our UI text.text, we set it to a substring of the total text that we want to write. So we do a substring. We start off on index 0, and we go all the way up to the character index. So every time this runs, the character index increases, so we print another character. All right. So just like this, we should have our basic text writer working. So let's see how we're going to run this code. All we need to do is call this function. So in order to do that, we need a reference to our text writer. So let's go to our UI assistant. And in here, let's add a serialized field for our text writer. So let's drag that reference. Over here in the editor, there's the assistant with our field, and just drag the reference. Yep, there it is. All right, so now in here we can call our function. So on start, instead of setting the text directly, let's call our add writer. Let's pass in our message text. For text to write, let's pass in this same message. And the time per character, let's put it 1f. So we're going to print 1 character per second. All right, let's test. Yep, there it is, 1 character, another one, and yep, everything seems to be working right. It's printing 1 character each second. So let's see what happens when it reaches the end. And yep, there you go, we have an error. Here in the console, we can see we have an argument out of range exception. As it says, the index and the length must refer to a location inside the string, so the index cannot be passed in length. So we need to test for our end condition. So let's go into our code for our text writer, and in here on the update, we increase the character index, okay. And now in here, let's test if we are already showing the complete string. So we simply do an if the character index. If the character index is bigger than the text to write.length, then we have the entire string displayed. So in here, let's stop our code. So in order to make sure it doesn't run again, let's set the UI text back into null, and we simply do a return. So when it goes through this, then the next frame UI text will be null, so it doesn't run again until it receives another writer. All right, so let's test and see if everything is working. Okay, here it is, and the message is still being written 1 character per second. Let's see it at the end. And there it is, the end of the message, hello world, and yep, there you go, no error. As soon as it reaches the end of the string, everything stops and everything is great. Right, awesome, so far so good. Now the code in here actually has a sneaky error. So let's say if we go in here and let's try to print So here, let's say we want to write 20 characters, and we want to write it at a rate of 10 characters per second, so 0.1 seconds per character. So essentially, this whole message should print in just 2 seconds. So let's see it running normally. There it is, and yep, after 2 seconds, yep, the whole message is written. Okay, great. However, now let's go in here, and let's forcefully limit our frame rate to just 3 frames per second. So go into the application and set the target frame rate to just 3. So again, let's see if the message does write in 2 seconds. And here we are, and nope, the message is not being written in 2 seconds, it is taking a lot longer. Now, the reason for that is because each frame is taking a ton of time to render. So what happens is over here on the text writer, our delta time is massive. So that means the timer goes down by a massive amount, but we are only doing a simple if. So the first delta time will put the timer a massive amount under 0, but it will only print one character on this update. So on the next update, it will only print one character, and so on and so forth. So if the delta time is bigger than the time per character, then the code will not work perfectly. So the solution to this is actually very simple. We just replace an if with a while. So whilst we're still in the same frame, we're going to print as many characters as the timer allows. So let's see if our code running at 3 frames per second still writes that whole message in just 2 seconds. And yep, there it is. You can see each frame more than one character is written in order to make sure that everything works great. Alright, great. So even when running at an extremely low frame rate, our code still works perfectly. Alright. Now, one potential issue you see is with the position of the text. Since the text is centered, as it gets written, it becomes very hard to read since the text is always moving around. So it would be a lot better if we could keep each character in its final position. So let's do just that. Back in our text writer, so let's add it in here as an extra option. Let's receive just a boolean, and let's call this the invisible characters. Let's store it. Okay, so now in here, let's go into our update. So in here, we increase the index, we calculate the substring, okay. Let's here store this on a string text. And then we set the UI text.text to our text, okay. However, before we do that, let's do a simple if for our invisible characters. And if we want to render the invisible characters, then let's add the rest of the text, but set the color in order to be invisible. So we increase our text by the substring, except in this case it's starting on the character index, going all the way into the end, and then we simply wrap this with a color tag. The color in here is in RGBA, so we have our red, then our green, then our blue, and finally our alpha. So with an alpha of 0, this text will be hidden. Alright, so that's pretty much it. All we need to go is go back here, and on our text writer, let's add true on our invisible characters. Let's see. And if there it is, each character is being written one by one, and now we can actually read it a lot better since every character stays exactly on its final position. If we pause while the effect is active, let's inspect our text object, and in here you can see what's going on. So we have the visible part, and then we have our color tag and the remainder of our text, with all of this being invisible. Alright, awesome. So our text writer is working, but right now we have one pretty big limitation. In here, let's simply duplicate the UI assistant, push it to the left side, okay. And now let's see what happens. And as you can see, the issue is that only one is working. This one is completely static. So essentially, when we add a second one, the second one overrides the first one, so only one is active at a time. So let's modify our code in order to support multiple text writers at once. Now there are many approaches we can take here. For example, we could create a new game object and add the text writer to it whenever we create one. However, that approach would create a lot of game objects which would severely affect performance. So the approach we're going with is to have just one main text writer script, and then internally we're going to handle various instances of text writers. That way we just have one game object handling as many instances as we want. So here on the text writer class, let's make a nested class, and this will represent a single text writer. Okay, now in here let's copy our code. And the add writer function will essentially be on the constructor. Alright, so we put all our code in our nested class. And over here on our main class, let's simply store a field for a text writer single. And when we add writer, we create it. Then on our private void update, if it is not null, Then we simply call update on it. Alright, so that's it. We have our main class just responsible for receiving the function to add a writer, and then we have all our logic inside our nested class. So let's test and see what happens. And yep, there you go, the text writer is still working and everything's still working fine, exactly the same as previously. So we modified the internals of the class, but we kept the same exposed function, so everything works without having to modify anything else. Alright, now that this new structure is working, let's add support for multiple text writers. So in here, instead of storing just a single text writer instance, let's store a list. Then on our private void awake, let's initialize our list. When we add a writer, let's add it to the list. And on the update, we cycle through the list. Alright, that's it. So just like this, we should have had a support for multiple text writers. So let's test and see if both writers are working. And yep, there it is. We have our both text writers working at the same time. Awesome. Okay, so everything is working, but let's see how we can further improve our code. Now, right now in here, our objects never get removed from the list. So we call add, we add an instance to the list, and we keep updating it forever, and the update just tests if it's not null. So it doesn't break, but we keep adding more instances to our list. So after quite a while, this list would be filled with zombie instances. So let's make sure we remove an instance from the list when it is completed. Now, one way I like to do that is by going into the update and just change the return value to Boolean. And essentially what it does is returns true on is complete. So we no longer need to test for UI text to be not null, since it will always be valid. And then when we reach the end, we simply return true. And if we don't return true, then we return false. Alright, so we have our update function correctly updating and also telling it if it is complete. So going back up here, where we are cycling through our instance, and here let's simply store the return for our update. Let's call it destroy instance. And if we should destroy instance, so if the update returned true, then let's remove it from our list. So going here, remove at this index. And since we are doing this inside our for, we need to go back and index in order to not skip one. Alright, that's it. Everything should be working. So over here on the update, let's do a debug.log on the single list in order to make sure that it goes up while it's active and then goes down. Okay, here we are, and the log is indeed saying 2. So we have 2 instances of our text writer, and when they both finish their message, and there you go, it goes back down to 0. Okay, awesome. So we no longer have zombie instances wasting performance. Now, one more thing we can do to make our class easy to use is to make it work with simple static functions. So that is very simple. We simply make here a private static text writer instance and set it on awake. And now let's make this function private and expose a public static function. The static function simply calls the internal function on our instance. Alright, so we now have a static function. And the benefit of this is let's go back into our assistant. And in here, we no longer need to store a reference for our text writer. In here, instead of that, we simply call by the class name text writer, and we call the static function. And that's it. Now our class is much easier to use. This way we don't need to keep passing around references to our object, we just call it using the static method. So let's see, and everything should still be working. And there it is, both of them still work, but we no longer need that reference. Okay, awesome. Now that we have this, let's add the ability to cancel a writer. So before we see why that's important, let's write some code to click on the window in order to skip and show the message. So in here we can now get rid of the secondary assistant, okay. Here on the message game object, let's add the button UI component. This is part of the CodeMonkey utilities that you can grab for free from unitycodemonkey.com. Now let's go into our system code. Let's grab the reference to the button. And we set the click function to be something. Alright, every time we click, let's show a different message. Okay, here's an array with a bunch of messages. Let's just play a random one. Alright, let's test and see if when we click, we can get a new message. Okay, here it is. Let's click. And yep, there you go. There's a nice message. Click again. And yep, there you go. Nice message. Click again. And yep, there you go. Another message. Click again. And yep, another message. Okay, great. So we are correctly capturing our clicks and posting a different message. However, let's see what happens when I click multiple times. And yep, there you go. Everything is completely broken. So essentially what happens is that we have multiple text writers competing for the exact same object. So we should really destroy the previous one before starting a new one. So let's go make that function. Here on the text writer, let's make a function for remove writer. And let's identify it with the UI text object. So what we do is we cycle through our single list. And if this one, we test for the UI text object. So let's make a function here to return that object. So now we can use this all the way up here. So if the UI text matches the one that we are looking for, then let's remove this one. Okay, so we are correctly removing it from the list. And now here on the add, let's add another optional parameter. Let's call this remove writer before add. And if we receive this as a true, let's call remove writer. All right, that should do it. Let's just go into the assistant and add true on our final remove writer. Okay, let's test. Okay, click and yep, it all works normal. Now spam clicks. And yep, there you go. As you can see, it goes back and only plays the very last text writer. So if I stop, yep, there you go. There's one, there's another one. Click a bunch of them, and yep, we no longer have that bug. Okay, awesome. So another great thing to add to our text writer is in order to be able to skip it when we click. So essentially, if we click when one is active and click again, we should be able to completely see that message before spawning another one. So for that, let's go into our assistant code. And in here, let's store the text writer single instance. So when we add the text writer, let's receive that instance. So let's modify this in order to return the instance that is created. So we just go here, modify this return value, return from this function, modify this return value, and then in here we create it. And just like this. Okay. So every time we call this function, we get the return value of the instance that was created. So back in here, we now have this one. And now in here, when we click, essentially we want to know if we have a text writer and if it is active. And if it is, we want to skip. And if not, then we want to show a new message. So we need to test if the text writer is active. So let's go in here in order to make that function. So we make a public, return a boolean, call it is active. And here we simply return if the character index is under the text to write dot length. If it is under that, then we still have characters to write, so we are still active. So back in the assistant, we can now do our if. So if the text writer single, first of all, let's test if it's not null. So if it's not the very first one, so not null and text writer single dot is active. So we have a currently active text writer. And if not, then we do the same code as previously in order to spawn a new one. Okay. So if it is active, then we want to complete it instantly and destroy it. So let's make that function on our text writer single. In here, make a public void. Let's call it write all and destroy. In here, what we're going to do is write the whole thing. So let's set the UI text.text to be the full text to write. So we write all the text, and then let's call up here our remove writer function. So in order to not need to pass in references, let's make a static version of this function. All right, just like that. So down here, first we write all the text, and then we call text writer dot remove the writer, and we pass in our UI text. All right, so we simply call this in here. So if we have a currently active text writer, then we call text writer single dot write and destroy. Now in here, the is active is testing for the character index, so let's make sure we also change that to be the text to write dot link. So the next time that this is called, it will be false. All right, so that's pretty much it. Essentially, when we click on our message, first we check if we have a text writer and if it is active. If so, then we call write and destroy. So if we click once the text is being written, it should display the entire text string. And if not, then we simply play a new text string. Okay, that should do it. Let's see. Okay, here we are. Let's click. Okay, let's see a more longer message. Click, okay, it's active, click again, and yep, it skips in order to display the entire message. So click, starts, click, skip, click, 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 click. Okay, awesome. So we have successfully made it that if we click whilst the writer is active, it instantly writes all the text. And if we wait for all of it to write, then we click, then it simply prints the next message. All right, awesome. Now let's just add one more thing. Over here in the project files, I have this nice talking effect. I made this ages ago, and it was heavily inspired by the sound effect on GTA and GTA 2. Here it is, let's hear. There it is, as you can see, just a very nice mumbled talking sound. So we want this to play once the text is writing. So in here, let's add the sound to our game object. Okay, here's the talking sound game object. Now let's go into our script. Let's grab our reference. And in here, when we instantiate our add writer, let's start playing our sound just like that. All right, let's see if the audio starts when we start writing a message. Okay, here we are. Let's click. And yep, there you go, the sound started when I clicked. Okay, great. Now, obviously, you can hear the problem is that it never stops. So in order to fix that, we need to know when the text has finished writing. So for that, let's go into our text writer. And all the way up here, let's add another parameter. This will be an action, which is inside the using system namespace. Okay, so we have an action, which is essentially just a void delegate, and let's call this on complete. So let's pass this to our instance function, and also to our constructor. So here we store our action. And down here on our update, when the entire string is displayed, if we have an incomplete, then let's trigger it. And do the same thing in here when we write all and destroy. All right, that should do it. So we now have a nice callback function. So we can go back into our assistant. And in here we pass in our action. So let's make a function that will work as our action. Let's call it the stop talking sound. All right, just like that. So when we add a new writer, we start the talking sound, and then we pass in the stop talking sound, which will be triggered when the text writer has finished. Okay, so let's see that. Okay, here we are, let's click. There's the sound, and when it finishes, yep, the sound stops. Awesome. So we click, and reaches the end and stops. Now we click, and we skip, and it stops as well. All right, awesome. So here we have created a very nice text writing effect. This is great for any time you want to polish the text you're showing the player. You can see this effect in action in the assistant for Battle Royale Tycoon. It looks much better like this than just printing the text instantly. We created a very nice clean class to handle everything. It supports multiple writers, and the whole thing is done using a singleton, so it's very simple to use using our static functions. Anywhere else in the code, all you need to do is call our static functions and everything will work flawlessly. So there's no need to pass any references around. So here it is, our nice text effect, along with some nice sound. As always, you can download the project files and utilities from unitycodemonkey.com. If you liked the video, subscribe to the channel for more Unity tutorials. Post any questions you have in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. Alright, see you next time!